Hi, welcome to Little Pieces Club Ministries podcast. My name is Chris Polad. I'm known as Mr. Chris to the kids at Little Pieces Club small groups. I'm a Bible nerd, a child of divorce, and author, and I created Little Pieces Club Ministries around the idea that when our hearts break, God can still make works of art from the broken pieces. I run small groups for children and teens and consult with and support parents. I also give lectures and seminars on request. The content centers around the science of adversity, abuse, and neglect, or ACE science, and how biblical design patterns harmonize with it. We are non-doctrinal and base our teachings on biblical scholarship. And along the way of this path, I discovered that Jesus' story, wrapped in the design patterns of the Good Shepherd and Tree of Life, help us process, grieve, forgive, and reintegrate our souls after trauma and relational toxicity. This helps us grow strong in solitude and community, and leading us and helps us love God, self, and others, which happen to be the most important blessings we can experience and give. The podcast is geared to help parents understand their children's point of view and to be a good shepherd and tree of life through the hard times. You can connect with us at www.littlepiecesclub.com. You can send us an email at littlepiecesministries@gmail.com, and then follow us on socials at LPC Ministries for Instagram, at Club Pieces on Twitter, and at Little Pieces Club on TikTok. We also have a YouTube video channel to look at all of our small groups and the videos that accompany the podcasts. We also have a Facebook site as well. So now let's get into this week's episode. We are in episode 5 of season 2, and this is Divorce 101 for Parents, part 3. And the first 2 episodes probably did not feel great listening to, and so now we get to really turn the tables and look at some hope for the future. So as we went through a lot of facts and science about how divorce can impact children, we also went through some obvious do's and don'ts, but these are easier said than done, especially if attachments to one or both parents are compromised. And typically, in many divorces, there is a parent who is able to realize the impact to other children or to their children, and there's another parent that seemingly is more inwardly focused, I guess is the most gentle way to say it. In some cases, you have a true amicable divorce, but even in those situations, there's some high-level issues that the kids need to deal with. So we're going to talk through today how the principles that are used to create the small groups of Little Pieces Club can be implemented at home and help kids both not only when they're in small groups, but at home. So first you need to realize there's 2 basic principles that are running in the background. There's going to be a lot more themes and that kind of thing. But the first is that a secure attachment to God through the Bible is a key resilience factor in recovering and thriving through adversity and relationship toxicity, of which divorce and conflict in marriage is one. And then I just said it earlier, but just to keep on my bullet points, how the format of LPC small groups can be woven into the home. So item number 1 that the parents need to be aware of is that of the encircled concept. First used in Genesis to describe why Eve was brought into being. This is the idea of the suitable helper, which is translated terribly wrong, and is used, unfortunately, by many feminists to kind of paint this false narrative of male domination in the Bible. What encircled is this idea of iron sharpens iron. or someone that challenges in love to make both better than either can be on their own. So that's what the information and the mentoring that I provide through Little Pieces Club is meant to be for parents. I am not going to be a friend that just agrees with everything that you say. I am here to provide you with insight, hopefully wisdom, based on the science that's been generated over the last 30 to 40 years about divorce and adversity impacting kids, so that you and God can make the best, most informed decision for moving forward with your family. So that is, I guess, the best way to kind of to describe my role through Little Pieces Club with parent mentoring, is to be an Ezer Kenegdo to you guys, and vice versa. I often get many insights from parents, and then I just fold them back into the processes that we have here at Little Pieces Club. So the next thing is that it is a weekly small group, and we have a format that we follow every week. And so this is a regular rhythm and a routine that kids can get into. And there is just very, very high value in this regular routine that kids can look forward to. It helps them feel safe at an emotional level, and that they can then thrive. And so at home, after a divorce, as you know, things can be very chaotic. And unfortunately, part of that is parents can just be absolutely overwhelmed. So, but anything that you can do to set up some type of a regular rhythm, and if it's around food, that's a really, really high value one, but food and sleep, and then regular play time or de-stress time and time for communication. So all of those, just think very intentionally about setting up around the home in the pre, post, and during divorce situations. And even if an ex is unwilling or unable to do that when the kids are with them, you can do it in your home, and with the things that you can control. And so the next basic theme is this idea of Sabbath. In the Hebrew Bible, there is quite a bit written about Sabbath, and that it is a 24-hour rest and delight and or celebration of the gifts God gives us. And there is a wonderful video from Bible Project that talks about Sabbath, that goes into this series of sevens, the festivals and the year of Jubilee, and all of these are rolled into this idea of Sabbath. And the basic thought of Sabbath is experiencing what God has in store for us at the end of days for those who remain loyal to Him. So Sabbath, I have found, is an extraordinarily powerful way to combat adversity, because a lot of what happens to us in our childhood just naturally, and then when you add conflict, divorce, and other things, it just compounds the shame that we leave childhood with. But Sabbath once a week makes people confront the fact that God thinks differently about us, and that there is just simple intrinsic value in us. So it really helps fight this whole shame idea. And so the things that we keep in mind for some periods of time where we do introduction with Little Pieces Club small groups is that even though the small group itself is supposed to be Sabbath, we spend about 15 to 20 minutes of just doing something fun and connecting. And that could be a board game. That could be some minor sport like throwing basketball in a basketball hoop. Cornhole. We have an indoor cornhole set. So just where we do something for 10 to 15 minutes. We don't have to talk. We just have to enjoy each other's company. At home, try to make sure that it does not include electronics unless there is a game that someone's playing on a console, Xbox, or something like that, that you can enjoy with the child, with your kids. If you're honestly bonding and having a good time, technology is good, but not just staring at a phone, not talking. And when needed, you can set a timer so that you make sure that it's at least 15 minutes every day or something like that, where you get this special one-on-one time with kids. And remember, it can also be in solitude as well. So mom or dad just needs 10 minutes to themselves, set a timer so the kids know that that's just your alone time and they can have their alone time. And then you guys do something for 15 to 20 minutes together. Again, daily routines are ideal, but at the very least, once a week of Sabbath is really amazing and important as well. So another thing that I refer back to all the time are these life metaphors that Little Pieces Club builds on. And as in the YouTube version of this, what we're looking at is a tree in the background, and then lots of words, but those words are skills that we pick up in solitude and then also community. And so what we're doing is that we're beginning to help children and teens define a language around formal and informal leadership, and that is self-leadership. And that basically we need to be aware that our actions may impact others, both in negative and positive ways. And then we also include ideas of power and influence, and we link all of this to God's glory or his presence or kavod or heaviness. And so in the first season, we go through our small groups, and a big series is on the private Christian journey, and another big series is on the public Christian journey. And these are skills and ideas and metaphors that help us become strong in our own space, in our solitude, and then also wise and loving in community. Now, at the center of all this is grieving and forgiving, and trying to remember that even when we're alone, we're not alone if we are believers in the God of the Hebrew Bible. So, but a lot of life is centered around suffering. So the Bible is viewed by us and many others as a source of wisdom to live through that suffering. And one of the key features is understanding that we're never alone when we suffer, that God is with us, and that he also suffered in several different ways. And one of the other ways we can pull back the lens and look at why this is all needed in terms of because life is suffering, and we go through this process of grieving, leading into forgiving. This helps us overcome shame. Remember, just a few minutes ago, I talked about the fact that one of the big deals about emerging from childhood is that amount of shame that we're carrying with us. And so these processes of grieving and forgiving help us overcome and deal with and minimize the shame that we get naturally in our childhood, but then also as we're exposed to a lot of adversity. So now we're looking at a slide that I call, that I refer to as the summary of the greatest blessings. And so it's 3 heart shapes that represent God and self and others. And that is, we are to love God with all that we are and others as ourselves. And then a smaller green heart is we are to love the created world. This, even though we are in this sort of environmentally conscious time frame, the idea of shalom in the Hebrew culture included our love of the created world. In many cases, you see throughout the Bible that the created world is actually personified. It's when Cain killed Abel, his blood ran into the ground, and the ground cried out. And that's a personification of the created world. And when disasters happen, oftentimes the Hebrews would categorize that as the created world is rebelling against us. If you look at these hearts, you see crowns, and that is, we are to see the sovereignty of God to create the rules and to manage this good world, and we are secondary to that. But because we are created in God's image, we are to see that dignity, that royal dignity in ourselves and in others. So that is why we have that in this diagram. But we need to understand that love has certain aspects to it. And so going around this circular diagram, we see that all of this greatest blessings talk is bounded with some pretty significant concepts. And so I list out the scriptures that help support that. So we've got, if we go around the circle, we have 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4, where we hear that love, first and foremost, is patient and kind. And then in Job chapter 13, verse 15, we see yachal, which is this idea of hopeful waiting despite our suffering. So that's something that is running in the background. In Lamentations, and that is through chapter 3, verse 19 through 35, we see the Hebrew idea of grief. And so we do talk a lot about that in Little Pieces Club. And then next is the idea of forgiveness. And a Bible passage is Mark chapter 11, verse 25. And then next we talk about submission. And Anah is what submission is. And that's seen in Isaiah 58. And even though we use the word submission today and almost think of it as a bad thing, what I try to call people's attention to is when we are thinking about win-win thinking. So what is a win for ourselves, but we also have to know what a win for another person is and a win for God. And that is the submission that we're talking about, the ability to deeply and fully understand what a win is to another person, including God. And when we are able to do that, that is the true idea of submission that we're talking about. Next is, do we act in this idea of right relationship, or tzedakah? And we see that illustrated in Isaiah 26, verse 10. And this is, do we do right by other people? In the Hebrew time frame, orphans and widows were destitute by the society, so it was expected that you go out of your way to help them. And so also we see this idea of justice, and that is, people can't go on being disloyal to God forever and not expect some type of consequence for that. So mishpat is the idea of Hebrew justice, and we see this in Psalm 33, verse 5, and many other times. And I do want to take a minute to talk about justice for a second, and realize that we often link this idea of justice to God's wrath. And of course, it's really difficult to form an attachment to a figure that we have this idea of wrath, which has got this really negative, bad connotation in the background. But again, we are all about making sure people are able to attach to a God figure. So we have to unpack this idea of wrath a little bit and realize that when God allows his wrath upon the earth and upon people, it is following years, often hundreds, if not thousands of years of his patience, of holding back the floodwaters of justice, the chaos that will ensue when people are disloyal to the laws and the blessings that he requests that they follow. When they disregard those, this chaos builds up and builds up like the flood, and he holds back those floodwaters until the very last moment where someone just absolutely crosses a line that they cannot come back from, and then he must let the floodwaters come. So this idea is far different than an angry father just yelling and punishing his children. And then finally, we look at wisdom, or chokmah, and Proverbs chapter 1, verse 20 is where you can read a little bit more about that. But we'll talk in a minute about a little bit more about the Bible Project. And throughout all of their good and amazing works, you hear about these types of concepts. So I bring them up here just to know that these are the ideas that are running in the background of Little Pieces Club Ministries. And then we also like to highlight a lot of the metaphors that are running through the Bible. And the biggest ones that Jesus even talks about, in his I am statements, are the idea of the tree of life and the good shepherd. And so when we meditate on this for a little bit, we see that through diversity, through hardship, through suffering, through what we go through in our childhood, that we are on this journey. Our private and public Christian journeys are from being a lost sheep to being rescued by a shepherd, then learning how to become a good shepherd, and then exuding and being a tree of life for other people. So again, this is running in the background of what's happening with Little Pieces Club Ministries. And so if you, as a parent listening to this, sort of kind of begin to buy into this metaphor of your life history being a lost sheep, being rescued, being taught to be a shepherd, and then growing into a tree of life, you exude that to your children, and they can see you do that, and then it helps to perpetuate this idea of goodness and blessing that will help counteract the adversity that comes from the conflict and the divorce. So another time that we set aside in Little Pieces Club as we are progressing is what I call Ask Me and Ask Each Other. We're taking advantage of the fact that there are a number of children that come together for our small groups, and I just give them a moment to express any questions or concerns they have about the divorce. We don't dwell on it, and often kids don't want to, but I do give them the opportunity to share. And so at home, this would be a great thing, maybe weekly or just every so often. Maybe if some big event is happening where the judge or magistrate or friend of the court is making a decision about something, to just check in with your kids about, ask me, ask each other, have a family meeting where we talk about where the divorce is and that kind of thing. And then after that, I stay with the topic of ask me and ask each other, but I use a specific discussion topic to see where kids are for that given week. And again, it's a similar concept. There may be something in particular that you want to check in with the kids about. And so just ask the basic question in a time of low stress, and let them know that they can come to you individually if they want. They don't have to talk in the open. So just give them lots of permission to think about this topic for a little while and check in with you. And then the important part is make sure you remember it. And if you haven't heard in a little while, a couple hours, day, or whatever the rhythm that you guys get into, that you follow up and you ask again, because sometimes kids just need that extra reminder. So the next big routine that we have in Little Pieces Club is sharing a meal together. And so with schedules being so busy, a very, very high value habit to get into is sharing a sit-down meal together at least several times a week. There is so much science behind this in general for a family. So think about a couple of discussion starters. Some of the favorites that I hear over the years are highs and lows for the day. What was the best part of your day? What was the in-between part of your day? Did you have any strong feelings today? Anything happen with your friends? Now, if you just do this out of the blue and start asking these questions, kids are going to feel like you're aggressively probing. But the point of this is making it a regular practice that they can eventually hook into and be comfortable around. And the important thing also in family discussions is that Ezer Kenegdo concept is that you're there to help, but be very, very cautious about your tone. And if you're always negative, they're going to feel like their shame buttons are going to get pushed. So make sure that you are using this as a time to praise good things, to instruct, sometimes to rebuke and correct. But remember, kids need to hear 8 times about something good for every 1 time that they hear about something bad. You can talk about chores around the house that need to be done. It's just a matter of domesticity. And then it's often hard to engage in conversation. So again, that's why we don't want to probe, but we want to just create this safe space to have a discussion and a meal. And the other thing is, don't forget to watch your children. See how they behave around the meal. Are they anxious? Are they relaxed? Are they calm? These are all things that you notice when you're kind of preparing a meal for them. And remember that part of the Good Shepherd ideology, or I don't want to say ideology, the Good Shepherd metaphor is that he prepares a meal and the sheep lay down and are satisfied after the meal. So this is a physical manifestation of being a good shepherd for your children. And it is so, so important. I just can't stress that enough. So while we're doing the meal, we also talk about our feelings in this adaptation of examine of consciousness. And so what this is ancient practice by the Desert Fathers who went out to the desert to live outside a culture that was spinning out of control. And the interesting thing is people eventually sought them out for peace and wisdom in times of great toxicity. And so one of these practices was basically just checking in on specific things internally. And so the way we do it is we go through our happy feelings first, then we check in with what was really fun from the week, and then we give ourselves permission and space to talk about things that we were disgusted about, that we were angry about, that we were sad about, and that finally we were worried about. And then another one is, do you have any emotions that you really can't understand, but they're there? And then we try to go through a process of naming those emotions. Again, super, super high value science on this, just the healing capacity of a child, number one, naming an emotion and then having a nurturing adult acknowledge that emotion as normal and not to feel shame about. I just can't stress this enough. And then the last question that we ask in the examine of consciousness is, did God feel near or far? And then we just acknowledge where we're at. And we say small prayers along the way of thankfulness and to help with the negative emotions, that kind of thing. It's really a very nice prayer format. And again, kids can internalize this format on their own, and they're getting this ancient Desert Father wisdom. So it's something very easily you can adapt at home at the end of the day in terms of your prayer time. Just like if you missed it at the dinner table talking about highs and lows, you can roll this into prayer time with the kids at home is another very, very high value way that these principles that we use in little pieces can help at home. So we talk about the elephant assessment test, and this speaks to emotional intelligence. And this idea that we make choices, but then at the same time, we have this somewhat uncontrollable elephant inside of us. And this just sort of builds on that concept. I like to also think of it in terms of lost sheep, good shepherd. So the lost sheep is actually the elephant, and the good shepherd is the rider. So again, this idea from rider elephant is the rider makes the choices, but then the elephant is how you get to that choice. And so if we are completely disconnected in a term that's called dissociation, it's very difficult to have our rational decisions be put in place if our elephant is very, very unhealthy. So every week I talk about our topic, and I have them check in with where their elephant or sheep and shepherds are. So in this example, when it comes to talking to people about God, I feel very uncomfortable, which essentially means socially you're dissociated. It's hard to deal with other people. Somewhat comfortable in the middle, which is where most kids are, and then very comfortable talking to other people about God. And so you can see that each one is a little bit more closer to lost sheep or sheep, and then the other is good shepherd. But we're very, very careful in saying that, hey, this is just checking in with where you are, and where you are is totally fine no matter what. And so what we're looking at here is this idea of emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Again, without shame, and this helps us become aware that we and others may be in different spaces, and that we may journey from sheep to good shepherd and trees of life at different paces. So the kids around the table get an opportunity to think, well, maybe one person's a little bit ahead of me, but that's okay. And then if things get out of hand, when people are calm, you can use this to help kids process rough patches. So if a child really has a blow up, you can use this construct. Wow, your elephant was really was really running all over everything. Tell me more about that. Express this idea of curiosity rather than judgment. And so the elephant needed something different. Help me understand why the elephant was so upset. And then they might be numb, and that is, they may not know what to say, and that's okay. And you can just tell them, hey, when you check in with your elephant or your sheep, let me know, and it's okay. So after we check in with kids in the rider elephant session, and this really just takes probably about a minute or so. This is a huge deconstruction of what we do in Little Pieces Club. We have what I call it the left brain time, and this is the basic idea, the lesson, the topic that we talk about. And I found over the years that the kids give me about 5 to 10 minutes before they get really antsy about this. So remember at home that if you're trying to be a good teacher of something, that you have to mix your right brain and left brain stuff to get the topic. But oftentimes we will connect our lesson to a biblical verse, again, so that they know they're engaging with scriptures, not being forced to read pages and pages and pages, but finding the scriptures that kind of help illustrate our daily lesson. So I use I interpret the Bible with context, and we'll get more into that in a minute. So it really, I take about one passage and then help them deconstruct the wisdom in that passage, and then how it connects to the rest of the Bible, and most importantly, what it speaks to about God's character and desires for us. And so then we link that, of course, to that public and private Christian journey, our grief journeys, and other topics. But in order to do that, there's a place that I go that you can go as well. So the number one resource that I use to help inform what I do in Little Pieces Club is the Bible Project. This is a PhD in Hebrew culture and linguistics named Tim Mackey, and a buddy from college named John Collins, who was very much into explainer videos. And so they built this crowd-funded nonprofit. Everything they produce is completely free of charge because of their crowdfunding mechanism. And it helps you get directly at what the Bible meant in the context that it was written in. Now, there's a little bit of grief that happens because depending upon your faith tradition, you might have been told that the Bible is this golden rule book that fell from the sky. And the scholarly look at this, at the Bible, is quite a bit more nuanced than that. It is God over millennium writing a consistent story with hundreds, if not thousands, of authors that has resulted in the many books that are in the Bible. And so they have many, many videos that are actually pretty cool to watch with your kids. And you may do it, even a 7 to 8 minute video is pretty dense, but the illustrations are amazing. And so in this episode that I'm talking about, we're talking a lot about the tree of life and how that links to LPC metaphors. But I just want you guys to know the resource that I use. And then if you want to do Bible lessons at home, this is a great place to start. Before you read any book of the Bible, they have explainer videos about the basic context of that book, and it makes it so much easier to grasp concepts for you. And in this episode that I'm using in the background, which is our episode 40, to go through and explain and deconstruct Little Pieces Club, I want to highlight not necessarily this the tree of life that I've been talking about. What I'm talking about is this idea that we have challenge versus suffering. And because adversity means that we are challenged. And oftentimes, and there, unfortunately in the news, we see a lot of shootings and that kind of thing. And that brings, true suffering. But what we're really, if we have a mindset that we have hope and that can live through, grieve, and learn and become stronger through our suffering, that becomes challenge. So it's a bit of a frame shift in how we look at things. So kids going through the divorce process, they are challenged to grow. And, they need a good shepherd to help them through this. And most days of the week, that's going to be you and other trusted adults in their lives. So we can be easily caught early on in this idea of just abject suffering. But if we keep this frame shift that is part of the garden that we work on, and that the metaphor of that is that we work alongside God to alleviate suffering, that we begin to frame shift into this idea of much more resilience by seeing the suffering as challenge. And when you do that, it really helps you stay active and not go into this kind of paralyzed state of just thinking that we suffer needlessly. So again, just exuding that idea and believing in your kids, even when they're maybe crying or upset, that you believe in them, that they can get over this, and that the tools that they have are, some of the things that we're talking about here with LPC, and their solitude, their prayer life, their connection with God, their connection with you. They have a lot of tools to help them navigate what's going on. And remember that our resources, we have, we always tie back to biblical design patterns that help us here. Attach to God, grieve, learn in private how to be strong, and then how to be strong in full view of others. We have a Marriage 101 series and supplemental episodes on journaling and then just taking short 5 to 10 minute times to be alone is very helpful. So those are all the principles and themes that we teach in LPC. So next, in a small group, we go into right brain time, and that's the activities, and to kind of reinforce the messages that we've talked about. And it's generally a very fun way to understand the lesson. Sometimes we watch a movie and deconstruct a movie. We talk about different themes that we're seeing in the movie, so that kids can identify with those characters. We use our emotion balloons to act things out. Play acting is really good, and then just crafts in general are what we like to do in Little Pieces Club. So there's an activity sheet for the kids that are around from 5 to 12. They're very easy to fill out, and on the website you can get access to the sheets if you wanted to do them at home, and they can be kept in a binder for sure. So we just talk about the brief lesson. It helps me keep it brief for the kids, and that they can then take the sheet home and refer back to it if they'd like. Now for the teens, we do a couple of things, and that is I teach them how to journal. And I do have a supplemental episode on teaching them how to journal video on the website that I have not converted into a podcast yet. So I think that this is a very good solitude activity for them to get into. And indeed, each kid that joins a small group will get a journal. And then we also think about a community activity and questions and that kind of thing to kind of wrap up the lesson. So I just vary this based on the kids and the teens that are available. And so even younger kids can draw pictures in their journals, so they don't have to write. So I encourage them for it to be a drawing situation as well. Now, the thing that comes up about journals is, what do you do as a parent with it? And so I might just subtly tell them that, that the general expectation is that it is a private space for children. But in extreme circumstances, when you feel that they are in a very bad place, or that they're not taking good care of themselves, that you reserve the right to look at that journal. This is a complete double-edged sword. There is high risk, high reward possible here. So I don't want to dictate your approach to a kid's journal at all. But sometimes, again, there's a time for everything under the sun. Sometimes you do need to read a journal in that parenting leadership point, just to get a sense of where they're at and if they're hiding a lot of things from you. Now, if it becomes a regular occurrence, you're abusing it, this should be a very, very, very infrequent occurrence to invade their private space of their journal. Well, that in terms brings us to the end of what we do in small groups, but we often finish up with Lectio Divina. Again, this is an ancient, very relatively quick practice that kids can use to attach to Scripture. That is, to trust that Scripture can actually speak into our daily lives if we invite it to. And I first learned about Lectio Divina from an author by the name of Ruth Haley Barton. And she describes this process as a dance with God. So we've done it in our podcast, so we'll just go ahead and keep that routine going today. And what I did for this episode was I just looked at the Bible app. So any app that you have that gives you like a daily verse, you can approach that daily verse with the Lectio Divina format. So this was Psalms 42, verse 1. As the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. And so, again, with Lectio, we read a verse, and that we're asking in the background, what word or phrase really pops out to you? And so this week, for me, I am focusing on, so I long for you, O God. And then I'm going to read it through again, and I'm going to reflect on what that means for me individually. And so, as the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. And I'm recording this after the mass shooting at Michigan State University, which is where I work. And I think that's why I'm just longing for God's presence, His calm, His peace, because as I process the grief and the shock and everything, I am just feeling that I long for God's presence. So then how do I respond to this? In this case, I try to adopt a posture of being wide open to God's presence, so that I'm not being a hindrance to that process. So as the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. So I can really feel that longing for God, and I know that He satisfies that longing. So finally, I read it one last time in my resting posture, which is that lost sheep who's been rescued, fed, and now I'm laying down to digest, and maybe even I put my head on the lap of the Good Shepherd, or some type of imagery like that. So, as the deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. So I just have that sense of thankfulness, of longing for God's presence. So I hope this Lectio process is very helpful for you guys. And then finally, I pray at some point during the small groups. Sometimes when we're doing activities, it's difficult to do the prayer at that time and when parents are picking up. So we usually do the prayer in the middle after we've done our examine of consciousness. But because of the podcast, I usually put it here at the end. So, dear Heavenly Father, despite our chaos, Lord, we know you are in control. We know that you have not promised us a life without suffering. So like the deer, we long for and are blessed by your presence in our lives. We ask you to grant us wisdom to live out the greatest blessings for our children, ourselves, you, and the community, which includes others, and even people that we either hate or consider our enemies. Help us know which of these interventions that we've reviewed today can be most successful when we implement them in our homes, to remind our family of your presence despite the suffering that we may all be feeling. We will take the next steps with you, Lord, no matter how small, and look forward to you walking with us in your time as we heal and become resilient. In your name we pray. Amen. Thanks as always for spending time with Little Pieces Club Ministries. I hope it is enhancing your view of the divorce process and giving you lots of food for thought on how to guide your children best through the dark times, and to really look towards the future and how it can definitely be bright with just a lot of intentional thought. So we look forward to connecting with you again, and never hesitate to reach out through our website, email, or comments. Thanks, and have a blessed week.